It is now the second week of July, which is why I want to talk about Purim. Took a minute there. Purim in rabbinical school is different than it is in other places, for a lot of reasons, but I'm only going to tell you one. One tradition, at least at HUC, was for a member of the faculty to offer a satirical sermon. And one year, the dean of our school, it was his turn, and the premise for his talk was that the Reform movement had just begun publishing a new publication, news headlines within the movement, and he had obtained an advanced copy. And he wanted to share some of the headlines. He read a bunch. They were all rather clever, witty. He is a very intelligent and very humorous man. But I only remember one of them, and it was this. Attention, right, it's a headline. Reform Jews profess their love of Torah, prefer not to read it. Torah study is at 10:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. Please prove Dean Joshua Holo wrong. He would want me to say that. Satire works best when there is truth hidden within the joke. Now, I know there are people in this room who have already read the Torah portion for this week and are already thinking to yourself, it's plural, it's a double parshiot, and it is, I know. But I also know just as well that many, likely most of us, have not. No judgment. Truly. Torah study is predicated on the notion that there is a lifetime of learning to be gleaned from every jot and tittle that you can see within the Torah, and you can see this in practice in most synagogues. The hour of Torah study is often filled discussing just one small section, sometimes just one verse. I know of a congregation in Los Angeles that decided that they were not going to follow the parshiot for their Torah study, but instead just start with the beginning, in the beginning, Bereshit bara, and see how far they got. And then the next week, they would go, if they got to 7 verses in, then they would pick up on verse 8 and on and on. I believe they've been doing this for well over a decade, and I think they were somewhere in Exodus. No judgment. Amazing, amazing. Sermons are no different. I cannot possibly comment on the entirety of a parsha, let alone 2, in a mere 30-minute long sermon. I just felt people tense up. Yeah, don't worry, it's only 25. I, along with every other darshan and darshanit, any other person who drashes or preaches, we must choose an area or a topic on which we are going to focus. And almost always, we're going to choose something that is profound or interesting or applicable to the modern world. And there is only one small problem with this approach. If that is the only Torah that you ever hear, you have no way to know what you do not know. And I hate to break it to you, but you do not know Torah if that is your way of learning it. And you have never seen what the vast majority of the Torah actually says. And I remember once asking a dedicated group of Torah study participants at the internship I had, who was confident that they had read the entirety of the Torah, from Eitz Chaim to Eitz Chaim, right? Scroll to scroll. Not a single hand went up. And this is a group of Torah study participants who come religiously, pun intended. By the way, it's 334 pages in the English translation. You could knock it out in a weekend without too much heavy lifting there. Not that I'm saying you should. And so you likely have not thought much about or even heard what we read this week in one of our 2 parshiot. It begins with God commanding the Israelites, to destroy the Midianites. 12,000 Israelites wage war, and as the Torah says, they kill every man and capture every woman and child and take every cow, every bit of cattle, livestock, and whatever else they wanted. And when they were done doing all that, the Israelites burned everything to the ground. Upon returning and reporting the outcome, Moses becomes incensed, enraged. Unfortunately, not for the reason we would hope. To quote the translation, "You have spared every female. Now, says Moses, therefore kill every male child and every woman who is not a virgin." It's worth pointing out Moses' wife, Tzipporah, was herself a Midianite, and I'm going to presume not a virgin. People are complicated. While I am new to this congregation, I am reasonably confident there is no one in this room or the synagogue, or perhaps on this earth, who would claim that as their favorite verse of Torah. I bring this to your attention, this verse, for a few reasons. Reason number one. Years back, I was speaking to a college student who had become disenchanted with Judaism. She had, in her young life, before going to college, been enrolled in a religious school, become bat mitzvah. She had done all the things. And then, in college, she flipped through a Torah commentary and found a passage similar to what I just read. There are plenty of others, by the way. And she could not square how we could elevate such a text, and also, throughout all her years in synagogue, she never heard mention the parts that challenge our moral sensibilities. In her eyes, after discovering what the Torah actually said, or what she felt it actually said, those of us sticking around in shul, we were morally bankrupt hypocrites. I don't necessarily blame her for that conclusion. Reason number two. You may not know these difficult, challenging passages, but you know who does? People who do not like the Jews. The internet is full of anti-Semitic screeds that compile these examples and claim that this is the text that we are studying and elevating right now in this room. That this is the most sacred of sacred, the holies of holies. This represents the teachings that we run into burning or flooding buildings in order to save. They say this is what the Jews believe. And even if that is not true, and it is not, it's hard for us to explain how to rationalize all of this when we ourselves do not know these texts and have never seen them. And the most important for last, reason number three. We are aware that the Torah prohibits homosexuality, or at least homosexual acts. What you may not be aware of is that traditionally, we read that section of Torah, Leviticus chapter 18, on Yom Kippur afternoon. Now, if you have only ever attended Reform synagogues, you almost certainly don't know that because our movement long ago began using a different chapter, Leviticus 19, in its place. And this is not some modern hippy-dippy switch either. The first prayer book to make this alternative reading, to make it the main reading, was published in 1858. Rabbi David Einhorn. The CCAR, the Reform Rabbinic Union of which I am a part, published an anthology called The Sacred Encounter, Jewish Perspectives on Sexuality. Looking through the table of contents, we see articles with titles like Created by the Hand of Heaven, Sex, Love, and the Androgynous, and The Ritual Sanctification of Same-Gender Relationships in Reform Judaism, and so on. And then, nestled among these various essays, we see an argument in favor of restoring Leviticus 18 to Yom Kippur afternoon. Worth a read. The author concedes in the second sentence of the essay, quote, "To be sure, at first glance, this will be a most unpopular idea." However, the idea actually doesn't come from the author, whose name I have written, Rabbi Jeffrey Brown, but actually he builds on the idea from none other than Dr. Judith Plaskow, a trailblazing Jewish feminist theologian. Primarily, he relies on the address she gave to the 1997 ordination class of HUC. You were there, right? And this is why I am grateful to Rabbi Brown, because otherwise, these ideas, when would they have come to light? So let me explain it. Doesn't mean we have to agree with it, but this is the rationale. The title of Judith Plaskow's address was Preaching Against the Text. As she writes, quote, "The failure to grapple with hard parts of our tradition is spiritually and socially corrosive because it leaves destructive ideas intact to shape our consciousness and affect our hearts and minds," end quote. She goes on to note that many in our community suffer the pain, often indirectly, of the most difficult parts of our religious canon. And in her view, they do not benefit from pretending, when we pretend, that these parts simply do not exist. Rather, as she argues, those who have fallen victim to them in myriad ways, they need to hear that their communities reject these ideas publicly, full-throatedly, with as much vigor as they do. I am not ready to bring back Leviticus 18 to the holiest of holy days, and I suspect I never will be. But, however, I do make a point most years when we get to Parshat Achrei Mot to acknowledge the verse exists in Leviticus 18 and to say, I wish it did not. Not that anyone has asked me to rewrite the Torah, yet, but if they did, I would leave that in, along with the glorified description of genocide that we read this week. Our tradition, as we understand it as progressive Jews, reflects humanity's understanding of the divine. And as such, as a human product, it has all the flaws that we do. Our Torah is holy, not because every word is holy within it, or that we might find every word to be holy, but because I am far from the first, going back millennia, to struggle with some of the passages contained within the Torah. And yet, I am just the latest generation, as are we, to see these challenging parts and choose to preserve our text nonetheless. Sometimes we learn who we want to be from observing the actions of others that we admire. But just as often, we learn who we don't want to be. There are parts of Moses we ought to emulate. There are parts we ought not to. I appreciate that our leaders, those that we aspire to, the Torah is named after Moses, the 5 books, but they are not saints. They are not gods. They are not perfect. They are flawed, and not in the little forgivable ways, but in the big ones. For me, that makes the Torah all the more meaningful that we are challenged by it, and it forces us to have these conversations, to consider the Torah, all of the Torah, and how we are to carry on this legacy ourselves. I look forward to continuing exploring this topic in conversation tomorrow at Torah study. I welcome you all to join us. And as we have reached the end of the book of Numbers, we say, Chazak, Chazak, v'nitchazek. Strength, strength, may we strengthen one another.